This is Subject to Approval, where we dive into the chaos, challenges and curveballs of today's business and agency world. No jargon, no waffle, just fast, fearless conversations about what's breaking and what's working in your business today.
All right, Steve, today I'd really love us to talk about what we're seeing in the juniorisation of agency talent and kind of the impacts of that, how we're seeing that play out, why did this happen? You know exactly what I'm talking about. So why don't you explain to our listeners what it is we say the juniorisation of talent?
Yeah, people are using different terms for it, and we're hearing it across industries, client side, agency side, all locations, every country we're talking to. So we're getting different names for it, but what we're really talking about is the elevation of more junior people into roles that previously would have had somebody with a lot more experience, a lot more years under their belt, a lot more credibility, and perhaps even just the ability to have seen a lot of the situations before.
That sounds like a bad thing.
Well, it is, but there's also a flip side of a good side to it. So we do have energy, we've got enthusiasm, we've got creativity, we've got fresh perspectives that are coming to the table, in an area that might be slightly more jaded and cynical.
Yeah.
But that comes with a cost, that the experience and the expertise that's gained over the years can't just be instantly brought to the table by people who haven't gone through it.
True.
And there is an element of not necessarily knowing what those gaps are.
True. So before we go into the negatives of it, and there's plenty of negative implications on business profitability, client relationships, culture, all of that. It did occur to me that there's another positive implication, if you like, for juniorisation of talent. You spoke about them bringing new energy and having younger people coming into the industry. That's fantastic. I think I've lost my thought. In addition to that, it also means we're creating opportunities for people to be able to step into more senior roles. We're creating opportunities to reward younger people and have them stay in the industry longer. It can be really demotivating to know that you're sitting in a role, you've been in this role for 4 years, and a promotion is still a long way away because there are, senior people ahead of you that are not going anywhere. So I do quite like that we're creating opportunities.
No, I agree with you. And removing those barriers and removing I'm going to be 5 years to this role, 10 years to this role, regardless of talent. But there's also things to be learned in that. So perhaps removing those set barriers and timeframes is great, but just removing any barriers, it's being open to anybody to step into any role.
Yeah. Okay. When we're talking about the juniorisation of talent, then I think we're all pretty clear now. What we're talking about is the fact that across the board, in all of the agencies we're talking to, in all of the countries in which we're talking to leaders, there are people in roles who now have less experience than a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Somebody in that role would have had more. So a business director might have had 12 years, 15 years of experience previously. Now maybe they have 8.
Yeah. And I think there's an element of the curse of knowledge. It's hard to imagine what you don't know. So previously, the learning curve was organic. It was, you were in the meeting, you watched it being done, you got a nudge, you got some advice, you had a mentor, officially or not, that you were learning and growing from. The learning process was not necessarily structured or formal, but during that time that it took to grow into the roles, you learned through those experiences.
100%.
And by foreshortening that, jumping straight into a role, you don't necessarily have gone through that. But what's hard is for the people who were more senior, they don't realize that they had a learning curve. So for some reason, they tend to think there was an inherent knowledge that they had. And it's hard to understand why the more juniors don't have this knowledge. Is that not something everybody knows? Is this not something everybody understands? Well, no, it wasn't. You just weren't aware when you learnt it. And moving that away to that compression of time, and also the fragmentation, that we're less likely to be sitting in a taxi on the way back from a meeting having a conversation. We're less likely to bump into somebody at the water cooler and have a little bit of, ad hoc mentoring. I think it's compounded that.
Yeah, we're certainly missing those ambient mentorship opportunities, certainly. There's something that you mentioned in there, ambient
mentoring. I love that.
The other thing is, I think, let's come to the why this has happened. And I think you just I'm going to pull at a thread you just mentioned there, which was we're promoting people for skills, not for knowledge, or we're promoting people with the understanding that they can step into a skill, but we're forgetting that they don't necessarily have the knowledge yet.
And I think we're also promoting based on enthusiasm, not experience.
Well, of course,
because they simply don't have it. So why has this happened? Is it fair to say that this is an economic factor? There was the crunch that came around at the time of COVID. Everybody's budget stripped out with the promise that they'll go up again later, but they never did. And the projects that would have had a mid-level or a senior with 10 years, 15 years experience is now being run by somebody with 2 years or 3 years experience. The complexity of the project hasn't gone down. In fact, I would argue the complexity has gone up as more touch points, more points of reference, less experienced people working on the other side of the table, which we'll probably come back to another point. It's actually got more complex with a smaller skill set.
So the job has gotten harder. The people doing the job are less experienced. Coming back to the why has this happened, or even prior to that, my point here is that there's not a single agency leader in any country that disagrees that this is a reality. They're all absolutely, my team is more junior than they used to be. So this is a given, right? This is a reality for sure. We've got different hypotheses. The P&L pressure is 100% driving. We need to put more junior people into this role because we can't afford the more expensive person anymore. So how we got here is obvious.
Why we're there is
the fact that we're here is true.
So what do we do?
Indeed.
And I think there was one point to it. I think it's fair to say this is about experience, not age. It's not saying that younger people are not as smart as older people. It's just the fact that how many years do you need to do something to become competent in it?
Good point. I mean, that juniorization could also be not about age. It's just going into a new role.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Having less years in that role.
So I think we can agree why and how. I think the what is, it's not changing. We're not going to suddenly see the seniors brought back in to fill these gaps. I don't think it's going to happen. But equally, the people we're talking about who are, again, this isn't an effort element. This isn't an intelligence element. It's not that they're not working hard or being smart, because they are super hardworking, super smart. I think we just need to move from seeing development and coaching and training and learning as an organic thing that magically happens and build it in.
Yeah.
They're not going to suddenly magically know these things that we think they should know. We need to spot what the gaps are and help people understand it. And the hard bit is, not only do the more senior people not understand why these people don't know these skills, the people we're talking about don't necessarily know they lack the skill in the first place. So it's a case of, how do you make this point to the senior budget holders that you need to spend money developing people, but also explain to the people we're talking about that they need the development? And it's easy to spot those two simultaneous conversations.
Let's talk about what kind of development then. So if we're saying skills can be taught, a lot of that does happen on the job, right? There are less ambient mentor opportunities. So there are potentially less skills being taught. So there's certainly that harder element of, you just need to know how to project manage. You need to know the client servicing fundamentals. You need to know our industry well enough to be able to sell the product, right? Those skills can be taught. Before we move on to the softer skills, do you feel that there is enough investment in the agency world to get people skilled?
No, I really don't. I genuinely believe the majority of people are picking the skill sets up as they go along, and they're expanding them. So they're moving beyond their capabilities and then desperately backfilling what they need to know. And I think there is a belief that you move somebody, you take a creative to be a design lead and you move them to be a creative director. At no point in that process are they taught people management. At no point in that process.
But that's the softer skills. So I'm thinking more about how they taught the project management.
Well, exactly my point. So they're not taught how to run a team. They're not taught how to project manage. They're not taught how to account for time. They're expected to be accountable for resource and timesheets without ever having been shown how to do them. They're expected to know how to hire and fire magically. And I think and similarly moving up through the client service route, there are skill sets we are expected to magically develop or be holding on to already, waiting to bring out.
Oh, it's so true. I was coaching somebody recently, and she has maybe 12 years of experience. She's, running a team. And she was told that she needs to performance manage somebody out of the team. And this was how she spent our coaching time, because these were skills she had not been taught. And her management team was saying, well, this is now your job. This is your job to do. I'm not going to teach you how to do it because you're in the role. You should have to do this. But she had no idea how to do it.
Well, and we had a long conversation recently with an agency head about allocation of budget to training. And it was a formula. This amount of revenue across this many people with this level of experience came to this number that was available per person per year. But that has been a formula they've been using for 30 years. When 30 years ago, that organic development, that warm mentoring was filling this skill gap as people moved along. That's not there. So it needs to be
a concerted investment.
Absolutely. A specific, a dedicated, but first acknowledged that the gap is there and acknowledged it needs to be filled.
Gee,
and it's not going to be done the same way.
I wonder who they could go to for training in this area.
If only there was a combination of soft and hard skills. But I think you make a really good point, though, that there are two distinct elements. There's it's not my job to do this, or nobody told me how to do this, and I don't know how to do this. And that's a curve in itself.
Totally. It is. Share with you an observation I'm seeing about the hard skills piece. I think there is an over-reliance on agency leaders and maybe network machines to say we're going to fill the gap of the hard skill lack through automations and tools and processes and repeatable templates. And that is great. We need efficiencies, and we'll have a whole separate conversation about efficiencies. But there isn't necessarily investment in teaching the softer skills, and automating those harder skills or templating those harder skills is still not quite the answer. It's almost like here's the springboard from which you can jump off, but that doesn't teach you how to jump off.
Or even here's the skeleton of something. We were having conversations yesterday about growth, and there's a whole subject in itself. But you can give people a Salesforce platform to use. You can give people a spreadsheet to fill in. You can give them a sales pipeline to add into. And that isn't the answer, though. The metrics and the tracking and the scaffolding around it doesn't solve the need. I know where to put the numbers, but I don't know how to get them. I know where to record the conversations I'm having with clients, but I don't know how to have the conversation. Oh yeah, I've got a sales deck for this product, but I don't know who to show it to. So I think you can give the hard elements, maybe you can to a degree. And again, there's a huge thing to be said for knowledge sharing. You don't want to invent the wheel each time. And there's no point in creating, a piece each time it's needed. But that doesn't solve the softer EQ element of can I, should I, how do I, before you reach for those things.
So let me ask you, if you were to give advice to the founder of an independent agency who is running a team of, let's say, 50 people, really smart cookies, really great agency, right? Great culture. Everybody's really keen to stay where they are. But this founder is struggling because their team are missing competencies and they're missing different competencies. What's your advice here? What do they do about this juniorization?
And I've looked at it in three elements, and I'm sure you've got a couple more to add, which I'll miss. I think the big step is acknowledging that it exists and that it's not just other people. Acknowledging that it exists and acknowledging that not everybody knows what you know. You've gone through this process, you've gone through this curve, you went up these steps of the ladder, and just assuming that everybody else knows that, and they don't. The second is that it's not going to magically fill itself, and it's not about the individuals you have in the room right now. So deciding that the 25-year-old you'd had right now isn't the right one and bringing in another one doesn't solve the fundamental issue. You're just changing bums on the seats. That's the second point. And the third is, once you acknowledge that it's there and that it's not the fault of the individuals that you're dealing with, is that concerted effort to say, right, we need to make a dedicated time and budget and effort, and not as a token piece either, to fill this gap. Because that is how the people we're dealing with are going to evolve and develop. And again, think about it not just in the business, but in terms of the development of the individuals. If everybody is juniorized, The individuals who aren't, that becomes a superpower. Knowing what everybody in that role used to know is now going to make you special in a world where nobody else does. So I think there's a level of that, but acknowledge it, understand why it's happened, and then dedicate to it.
I love that. Obviously, I love that because I want people to invest in their talent. You know, it's important for the future of our industry that people love what they do.
Yeah.
And they're only going to love what they do if they feel competent in doing it.
But how would they do that? I mean, it's easy for me to say, invest in the talent,
Well, this
focus
was
in
my
the
question to
training.
you.
What's the that's the easy bit. I'm full of the easy statements. What's the actual, when that rubber hits the ground, how does that actually happen?
Well, I feel that we have an answer to that too, which is, well, how do you not actually? Because the benefits to the business are too important. You mentioned differentiation. If you have talent that is accelerated and is mature, that person with 12 years experience now behaves like a person with 18 years of experience or 15 years of experience, they are worth more to your business and they still cost the same, right? Or maybe a little bit more because you've invested in them. But they're going to be competing against an agency who only has people who've got 12 years of experience and have less of that knowledge anyway. So they're behaving like they have 8 years of experience. So all of a sudden, your talent is differentiated in the market.
Yeah.
If you have differentiated talent, obviously your culture is improved. So everybody likes being at your agency. Clients buy into you more easily.
Yeah.
They want to be a part of this agency, and you're being a lot less inefficient. So I do feel like we'll come to this efficiency piece later, but let me touch on it, which is if your talent is developed well, they know what to focus on. They know how to push back with your clients when they're being asked to do something that is irrelevant or less important. They can have those adult conversations and get to more strategic work more quickly. So the output is higher and getting to that output is quicker.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's an incredible revenue driver of having people that can make intelligent add-ons and builds. And then there's a huge bottom line impact of having people efficiently running those projects. And I think that's a win. And in terms of point of differentiation, if your point of differentiation is that you're better versus our point of differentiation is we've got a treehouse in the back. We have football Fridays. We have something it's a distinction without a difference. If your differentiation is we're actually got better product and better people.
Yeah, super smart people who develop excellent work that you will enjoy working with, and we get it done more quickly.
Yeah, that's a point.
That's a differentiator.
That's worth something.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
No, fantastic. Yeah.
All right, I think we're going to wrap this up then. Juniorisation is a reality of the industry. Very few leaders know what to do about it. We've offered some suggestions here on why it's important to invest in your people and fill those gaps between, the hard skills and the soft skills as well. And I love that piece of advice, which is don't assume that they know what you know, and don't assume that they're any worse off because they don't know what you know.
Yes.
I've seen way too many leaders just, like you say, hot seat. Like, I'm getting rid of this person. They weren't working out. I'll get a new one.
Yeah.
Getting rid of that person. They weren't working out. Why is my team underperforming?
Yeah.
It's because you keep employing the same people and not realizing nobody has that skill set. Invest in them.
Totally. 100%.
Anything else I've missed?
No, that was great.
All right, brilliant. Reach out to us if you've got any additional thoughts on this topic, or if you'd like to have a conversation with us directly.
Yeah.
Work can be tough, but you don't have to figure it out alone. We're here to help for coaching, workshops, or just a smart second opinion. Let's talk. Contact hello@artemisapac.com. We're Artemis, and we get it.